The Romans built aqueducts that still carry water today. They engineered roads that shaped the geography of Europe for 2,000 years. They created a legal system whose principles still underpin the laws of dozens of modern nations. They produced philosophers, architects, generals, and administrators of extraordinary sophistication. They mapped trade routes that connected Britain to India. They built the Pantheon, a concrete dome so precisely engineered that it stood for nearly 2,000 years without requiring structural repair. And they believed that the liver was the seat of human emotion. Not the heart, not the brain, the liver. When a Roman felt love, it was the liver that stirred. When they experienced rage, fear, or grief, the liver was where that feeling lived. The Latin word for liver, iecur, appears repeatedly in Roman poetry describing the most intense emotional states. Horace wrote of a liver set aflame by passion. Catalyst located longing and torment in the same organ you use to filter toxins from your blood. Pliny discussed the liver as the origin of blood, and therefore the origin of the vital spirit that animated all feeling. This was not superstition unique to Rome. The belief that the liver was the emotional and spiritual center of the human body was widespread across the ancient world and far older than Rome itself. The Mesopotamians, centuries before the Roman Empire existed, used animal livers for divination, reading the future in the surface of a sacrificed creature's liver, because they believed the liver was where the soul of the animal resided. Elaborately detailed bronze models of sheep livers have been found at Mesopotamian archaeological sites, marked with regions corresponding to different divinatory outcomes. These were teaching tools. An entire profession, the haruspex, was built around the reading of livers. In Rome, this practice continued. Before major military campaigns or political decisions, a haruspex would examine the liver of a sacrificed animal and declare whether the omens were favorable. Julius Caesar reportedly received an unfavorable liver reading on the morning before he was assassinated. He went to the Senate anyway. The ancient Greeks, particularly before Plato's philosophical reorganization of the soul, also treated the liver as a seat of passion and the irrational self. In Plato's Timaeus, written in the 4th century BCC, he describes the liver as the organ through which the rational soul communicates with the lower, appetitive soul. It acts like a mirror, reflecting divine thought into the lower self. For Plato, the liver was not just where emotion lived. It was the organ through which higher and lower aspects of the human being interfaced. Why the liver? The answer reveals something profound about how ancient people attempted to do science, how they tried to understand the body using only what they could observe, before microscopes, before germ theory, before any of the conceptual frameworks that make modern medicine possible. The liver is the largest internal organ in the human body. When an ancient physician or warrior or sacrifice officiator cut open a body or an animal, the liver was the most visually striking internal structure. Large, dark, red, dense, and unmistakably prominent. It was also clearly the most blood-rich organ they could see. Blood pooled there. Blood saturated it. The liver did not just bleed when cut. It was already full of blood before the cut, in a way that no other organ visibly demonstrated. And in the ancient world, blood was understood to be the vehicle of life itself, the substance that animated the body, carried its energy, and departed at death. Every ancient civilization noticed that when blood left the body, life followed. Blood was not merely a bodily fluid. It was the visible, tangible presence of vitality, spirit, and existence. If blood carried life, and the liver was the organ most obviously associated with blood, the organ that seemed almost to be made of blood, then it made sense, by the logic available to an ancient observer, that the liver was the center of life, feeling, and soul. There is a deeper layer to this that makes it even more interesting and more modern than it might first appear. Modern medicine knows that the liver does not produce emotions, but it does play a central and profound role in the body's physiological state, a state that directly influences mood and feeling. The liver regulates blood sugar. This is not a trivial function. Blood sugar levels have measurable, significant effects on mood, cognitive function, irritability, energy, and emotional stability. When blood sugar drops, a process partly mediated by liver function, people become irritable, foggy, anxious, or emotionally volatile. When blood sugar is stable, emotional regulation is easier. The ancient Romans could not have known this mechanistically, but they lived in bodies where the liver's work quietly shaped how they felt every hour of every day. The liver also processes alcohol, a substance the Romans consumed in extraordinary quantities through wine that was the centerpiece of social life, religious ceremony, and daily nutrition. Anyone who has observed the effect of alcohol on emotional states has witnessed the liver's work made visible. The organ that metabolized their wine was, in a very literal sense, the organ that modulated their emotional experience of their social world. Beyond that, the liver is deeply involved in the metabolism of hormones, including the stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, and the reproductive hormones that govern desire, attachment, and emotional bonding. The liver does not generate these hormones, but it breaks them down and regulates their levels in the blood. An impaired liver means disrupted hormone balance. Disrupted hormone balance means disrupted emotional experience. In other words, the Romans were wrong about the mechanism, but they were not entirely wrong about the observation. The liver really does affect how you feel. They simply lacked the tools to trace the chain from cause to effect. They saw the relationship without being able to explain it. This is the pattern that recurs throughout the history of ancient medicine, and it deserves more respect than it usually receives. Hippocrates was not wrong to notice that people near swamps got sick more often. He was wrong about why. His theory of miasma, of bad air, was incorrect, but the observation was accurate. Swamps breed mosquitoes, and mosquitoes carry malaria and other diseases. The correct observation preceded the correct explanation by 2,000 years. The four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, was an incorrect model, but it was built on genuine, careful observations of how different bodily states affect health and behavior. The idea that the body operates as a system, that imbalances cause disease, that restoring balance restores health. These are not wrong. They are simply expressed in terms that mapped onto what ancient physicians could observe, rather than terms that mapped onto what they could not yet see. The Romans also believed, as did many ancient peoples, that the heart was the seat of reason and courage, not emotion, as we tend to think of it today, but the deliberate, controlled qualities of mind that a warrior or statesman needed. The heart was where strength of character lived. This belief is so deeply embedded in Western culture that we still use it, idiomatically, thousands of years later. We say someone has heart, meaning they have courage. We say someone is brokenhearted. We say someone does something with their whole heart. The metaphor outlasted the theory. The gut, what we might call intuition, was another significant site of feeling. The ancient Greeks used the word thymos to describe a spirited, passionate energy that lived somewhere in the chest and diaphragm. The Roman equivalent, animus, carried a similar sense of the animating emotional force. These were not simply metaphors. They were attempts to locate, in the geography of the body, where specific qualities of experience originated. And these attempts were not arbitrary. They mapped onto real physical experiences that human beings still have. When you are frightened, your heart pounds. This is real. This is the sympathetic nervous system activating the heart in response to threat. But what you feel is the heart pounding in your chest. An ancient observer concluding that fear lives in the heart was drawing a rational inference from a genuine physical sensation. When you are disgusted or anxious, your stomach clenches and your digestion stops. This is also real. This is the enteric nervous system, what some researchers now call the second brain, shutting down digestive activity in response to stress. But what the ancient observer felt was the gut, clenching, responding to fear. The inference that courage or anxiety lived in the gut was not irrational. It was phenomenologically accurate. We now know, in fact, that the gut-brain connection is not metaphorical at all. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, connects the brainstem directly to most of the major organs, including the gut, the heart, and the liver. Signals travel in both directions. The gut sends signals to the brain that influence mood, anxiety, and emotional state. The brain sends signals to the gut that alter digestion, immune function, and inflammation. The ancient insight that different organs were sites of different aspects of inner life was not as wrong as it sounds. It was simply expressed in the wrong anatomical vocabulary. Ancient people felt these things as clearly and as intensely as you do. They simply worked backward from sensation to source, without the tools to trace sensation to its actual neurological origin. The brain, the organ we now understand to be the actual seat of all experience, emotion, and thought, is remarkably unhelpful if you are trying to figure out what it does by looking at it or feeling it from the inside. You cannot feel your brain working. The brain has no pain receptors. You can stimulate brain tissue directly in a conscious patient without causing pain. The brain does not visibly respond to emotional states in ways you can see from the outside. It sits in the skull, doing its invisible work, giving almost no direct sensory evidence of its function to an unaided observer looking at it from the outside or feeling it from the inside. The liver, by contrast, was warm and visibly blood-rich. The heart, by contrast, was loud and physically active. You can feel it beat, feel it race, feel it slow. The gut, by contrast, responded immediately and unmistakably to fear and excitement. These organs spoke directly to ancient observers in a way the brain simply did not. And so the brain was assigned lesser functions, or stranger ones. Aristotle, one of the most rigorous and careful thinkers the ancient world produced, believed the brain's function was to cool the blood. He saw the brain's proximity to the sinuses, noted the cooling effect of the head, and concluded that the brain was essentially a biological radiator, the body's mechanism for preventing the blood from overheating. He was spectacularly wrong. The blood cooling function he assigned to the brain is actually performed, to some extent, by the nose and sinuses, which do cool inhaled air before it reaches the lungs. So even his error contained a grain of accurate observation. Galen, the Roman physician whose work dominated Western medicine for over 1,000 years, made significant progress. He demonstrated, through experiments on animals, that the brain controlled voluntary movement, cut certain nerves connected to the brain, and the muscles they served went limp. But even Galen retained elements of the ancient system. He believed in the primacy of the liver as the organ that produced blood and distributed vital spirit through the body. He believed the brain produced a different kind of spirit, animal spirit, that flowed through the nerves. He was building the most sophisticated medical model the ancient world had produced, and yet the liver remained central. This is the most humbling thing about the history of medicine and science. The most brilliant, careful, rigorous thinkers of every era were working at the very edge of what their tools and conceptual frameworks could reveal. They were not making careless errors. They were doing their best with what they had. And yet, from where we stand now, some of their most confident conclusions look not just wrong, but almost backwards. Which brings us to the question that should make anyone who takes science seriously, genuinely uncomfortable. What do we believe right now? With confidence, certainty, and the full weight of current consensus behind it. That will look equally wrong to someone looking back from 2,000 years in the future? Not everything we currently believe will be wrong. Much of modern medicine rests on physical principles and biochemical mechanisms that are almost certainly correct in their fundamentals. DNA carries genetic information, neurons transmit signals electrically and chemically, pathogens cause infection. These foundations seem unlikely to be overturned. But there are entire domains of current knowledge where our models are still young, still contested, still built on observations that may be as incomplete as ancient liver theory. The mechanisms of consciousness remain genuinely mysterious. The relationship between the gut microbiome and mental health is only beginning to be understood. The long-term effects of the pharmaceutical interventions we now use routinely may look different in retrospect. The current models of nutrition and metabolism have already shifted dramatically over the last century and may shift further. We are doing the same thing the Romans did. We are looking at the available evidence, applying the best reasoning we have, and building models of the human body and mind that are internally consistent and make sense of what we can observe. We are doing science, but we are doing it with the tools of our time, and every era's tools have limits that the next era will be the first to fully see. The Romans were not primitive. They were not stupid. They were us, in a different century, with different instruments and different conceptual vocabularies. They built roads that lasted 2,000 years. They also thought love lived in the liver. Both things were true at the same time, and both things tell you something real about what it means to be human, to be brilliant and limited simultaneously, in every era, working at the edge of what can currently be known, building the best picture available of a reality that is always larger and stranger than the picture. That is what the Romans were doing. That is what we are doing now. And that is what every generation after us will be doing too. Looking back at us from the vantage point of tools we cannot yet imagine, with the same mixture of admiration and affectionate, humbled amazement.